I'm Thanassis Cambanis. Welcome to the Order from Ashes podcast. Today I'm joined by two Century International colleagues, Sam Heller and Aron Lund, and we're going to talk about the Ukraine war's impact on Syria. But before we begin, I just want to talk to you for a minute about a special thing we have coming up for you later this month. We have an all-new self-contained season of Order from Ashes that's hosted by Naira Antoon, and it's built around our Transnational Trends in Citizenship project. That podcast is going to launch April 25th, and we're going to have 8 episodes of experts from the Middle East, North Africa, the United States, and Europe talking about what they learn when they look at their different areas of expertise across region and across the world. So I look forward to sharing that with you and giving you a chance to listen starting April 25th. Now, back to the regular podcast. I've got Aron on the line from Stockholm and Sam on the line from Beirut. Thank you both for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Hello. Yeah, good to be here.
So, although we're going to be tempted to talk about any and everything related to how the Ukraine war connects to the region and to Syria, I think today we're going to try and keep this conversation focused on Syria specifically. And I want to start by asking you, Sam, especially because you have a report out on this just now. What are the direct impacts on Syria of this war, the Ukraine war?
So there's been a lot of kind of media conversation about Syria's nexus to Ukraine, as relates to kind of the Syrian government's vocal support for Russia in Ukraine, Syria possibly sending mercenaries to fight alongside the Russians in Ukraine, parallels between the way the Russians fought in Syria and then the way that they are currently waging war in Ukraine. But then I wanted to focus on kind of two aspects of how the Ukraine conflict is already or is about to affect Syria. That sort of dovetailed with a lot of the work that I've done with Century Foundation over the past year. So principally, it seems that the war in Ukraine is about to exacerbate humanitarian conditions in Syria. The war's effects on global grain and energy markets will be acutely felt in Syria. It's someplace where the situation of Syrians was already extremely kind of precarious and difficult. And then secondarily, I think that we're likely to see an impact on Syria diplomacy and on humanitarian diplomacy in particular, just because a lot of the important humanitarian compromises that we've seen on Syria over the past year were underpinned by a U.S.-Russian dialogue on kind of cross-border humanitarian assistance to Syria's northwest and related issues. That now, in light of Russia's conduct in Ukraine, seems over.
So we'll get into more detail on both of these things, the humanitarian consequences and the diplomatic consequence. But before we dig in deeper, I want to turn to you, Aron, and ask: would you add any extra categories to this? I mean, so I guess the parameters here are we're avoiding the symbolic and the vague, and we're looking at tangible, measurable ways in which the Ukraine conflict is going to affect the reality of Syria. Are there any things beyond humanitarian and diplomatic displacement that you think we should put on our agenda today?
Well, I mean, there's always a risk that you'll have a military flare-up in Syria as a consequence of the Ukraine war, especially if relations between Russia and Turkey were to go south. Then there could be something in Idlib, or you could have Russia or the United States, more probably Russia, or the Russian side with Assad and the others, trying something in the northeast of Syria to put pressure on the United States, or signal things there. So that could happen, or you could have actors in Syria trying to exploit the situation without the permission or the coordination of their their external patrons. So that could be something. There's a lot of talk about mercenaries, Syrians being recruited to fight in Ukraine. We haven't really seen that happen yet, and I think the numbers bandied about 16,000 or 40,000 are that's just fantasy. And I don't think it'll, if it happens eventually, I imagine some Syrians will turn up, probably because people have promised they will. But I don't think that will affect Syria in any meaningful way. But so that's something to watch for, a military flare-up in Syria. And then there's just, if this is a drawn-out war, it could be taxing for Russia to supply its forces in Syria in various ways, because now you have Turkey has shut the Bosporus for military traffic, for example, for Russia or for anyone really. So yeah, I think there could be knock-on effects, but we haven't seen that yet.
All right. Well, I think that lays our table nicely to have sort of three subjects here: one, humanitarian; two, diplomacy; three, military spin-off effects. Let's start off with the humanitarian angle. In your report, in your report, Sam, you talk a lot about the food security issues, and you also talk about the sort of general economic constraints that are going to hit the region as energy prices go up. I want to add one other thing to that list as we turn to you, and that's the sort of displacement of international donor money, which I presume, although I haven't seen specific numbers on this, I presume that a lot of the international funds that have flowed to Syria are just going to be diverted in practice to the emergency of refugees and IDPs around the Ukraine. So let's talk a little bit in specifics about how this is going to affect hunger, food prices, livelihoods, and really sort of gut level ability of Syrians to live and function.
Yeah, I mean, first, yes, I think that it's likely that that aid money will be diverted elsewhere. I mean, it seems that some of these donor funds are already limited. Their budgets are stretched. And then the demands are many, both kind of for aid overseas and at home, after an exceptionally difficult economic period.
What's the scale of international aid that's going to Syria right now, and what's the amount of early recovery aid that was hoped for in the coming period before Ukraine changed the landscape?
I don't know the dollar figure off the top of my head. I know that the UN humanitarian coordinator has talked about roughly a quarter of the coming year's budget being dedicated to early recovery or resilience assistance. So that was that's apparently how they've been planning. I mean, that said, I have heard from, I had a diplomat say to me earlier this week that, at least he thought that Syria would fare better than some other countries, just because, Syria is a conflict that is familiar to governments. The refugee crisis is something that was very immediate, including for European donors. And then so, some kind of interest in contribution to Syria is likely to continue. Whereas, interest in Lebanon, for example, maybe not so much.
Or Iraq, sure. What about hunger? Are people going to go hungry as a result of this, both financial and grain supply disruption?
Yeah. Yes. So that is the main issue here, right? So I think that kind of food insecurity in Syria has been experiencing a hunger crisis for over 2 years now. It is multi-causal. That was the intent with this food security paper that we published last year, was attempting to disaggregate, to pick apart these many kind of causal factors that went into it, which is a tricky thing to do and to explain in any way that makes sense. So it relates to Lebanon's economic crisis, it relates to the coronavirus pandemic, to the intensification of Western sanctions on Syria. And then the kind of the principal, it seems, reason for kind of this widespread food insecurity in Syria. Currently, per UN estimates, about 12 million Syrians of a population of a little more than 21. It's basically an issue of Syrians' crushed purchasing power. It's just that Syrians are too poor to afford to feed themselves and their families. And then I think that if you look at some UN aid documents, then they chart what they call like variously an income gap or an income deficit, whereby Syrian households' average incomes and expenditures had been roughly even as of 2019, but then because of Syria's kind of all-encompassing, mutating economic crisis, those diverged. And so now Syrian households' average expenses are about 50% more than their average income. So what that means is that, people, they can't eat, right? So it means that people skip meals, parents skip meals so their children can eat. There's a resort to what humanitarians call negative coping strategies or coping mechanisms, including like the selling of household property, of productive assets, child labor, child marriage.
I don't want to cut you off as you outline this real horrifying humanitarian condition, but I want to keep us focused on how this connects to the Ukraine war and the spin-off effects. How will the conflict in Ukraine affect that food insecurity in Syria?
Well, the conflict has disrupted global grains and energy markets. Ukraine and Russia are together. They supply some 30% of wheat to global markets, in addition to other critical staples. Sunflower oil is another, and then one that is an important part of Syrian diets. So the sudden disruptions to supplies of these goods, they can be sourced from elsewhere, but the prices are going up dramatically, and then that is going to further jeopardize these hungry Syrians who are already struggling to afford what they need. It seems that the most immediate impact will be because of the rising price of fuel and its pass-through effect on the price of goods, in addition to kind of the price of transportation, which matters for Syrians' ability to access local markets to shop. But we may also be looking at hiccups, at problems in the supplies of wheat, which Syrians need for bread. It is the kind of the rock bottom, the staple of Syrian diets, as well as other kind of necessary supplies. So it's going to make what is already a dire situation, I think, just much worse.
So, Aron, let me ask you, especially from the vantage point of both a Syria watcher and someone who's looking at how Europe and European countries are adjusting both to the new reality in Ukraine and to the old reality in Syria. Do you see changes or a loss of interest in engaging, a loss of interest in spending money on this frozen conflict in Syria? And in particular, I know there's some governments in Europe that are in favor of early recovery aid, and other governments in Europe that are really opposed to spending any money in Syria at all, especially as they blame Iran and Russia for propping up the Assad regime, and have sort of taken the position that those governments should take care of the needs of Syrians. How do you see that landscape?
Well, I think that's, I think as Sam pointed out, I think the general crunch on, the pressure on aid budgets that has come after the Corona crisis and now with Ukraine eating into aid spending as well, and also just refugee reception in Europe. A lot of countries actually use their aid budgets to finance that, so that'll eat up some aid money as well, and so I think that is something that will put pressure on Syria this year, next year. But as for the political effect of seeing countries change their view of how aid money should be spent, I don't think we've seen that yet. I haven't heard anything to that effect. I think it's possible. I think, the reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in Europe, I mean, all over the world, but in Europe specifically, has been so intense that people are looking now for any area where you can put pressure back on Russia. And to the extent that Syria is identified as something that's, dear to Russia's heart, that the Assad regime is, or, Russia is pushing to have more money spent on early recovery, other people, they want other nations to finance aid for Syrians, but they want more of it. If that's seen as a Russian request, then maybe there will be voices now that want to deny that just because it comes from Russia, and that would be destructive. I think it wouldn't be a rational response to this, because these issues are not, I think this is something that there's actually a common interest in making Syria function. Nobody likes the Assad regime, nobody in Europe at least, but it is what it is, and the imperative here is to make sure that Syrians don't end up starving in addition to living under a dictator.
Yeah, and one of the things I find most dismaying, especially when I follow Sam's work on the specific issue of hunger and insecurity, is it seems to me like there's a really awful and perverse experiment underway, whether this is by design or by neglect, to see just how much misery this population can support before it actually collapses into famine or something equally bad. And it's a sort of, there's lots of responsible parties here, but in terms of what we've watched unfold over the last couple of years, it is this like terrible experiment in what is the maximum sustainable amount of misery the Syrian population can withstand before it actually leads to some kind of mass death.
I think you do have that in like certain people who want Syria to collapse economically for political reasons. That exists. I don't think it's a huge thing in like national strategies in Europe or even in the United States. Maybe under the Trump government it was, but it's more an issue of people not really connecting these issues to each other and just saying that well, it's Assad's fault anyway. So what does it matter what we do? Well, of course it matters what we do, but whether it's, sanctions, they're not responsible for everything, but they do have an effect on the situation. Whether it's how aid money is spent, of course it matters. So, and of course it is Assad's fault, but having said that, now what do we do,
Yeah, I mean, there were Trump administration officials kind of when the max pressure campaign hit its apotheosis in sort of early middle 2020, who were pointing seemingly excitedly at protests in Sweden, at some of Rami Makhlouf's videos that he was issuing from his house outside Damascus, thinking that it was kind of evidence of cracks in Syria's regime. And then also at just kind of the real spiral of Syria's economy generally, the depreciation rapidly of the lira, as kind of evidence that sanctions were hitting, that pressure was working, but then several years later, where are we? Right? I mean, like it has not. I mean, this type of pressure, it has not produced useful political outcomes. And then now, I mean, Syrians are under incredible pressure, thanks in part to us.
By us, you mean the United States government. I'm sure Aron doesn't feel like he's got a stake in that. Okay, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Hi, I'm Thanassis Cambanis. You're listening to the Order from Ashes podcast. I'm talking today with Sam Heller in Beirut and Aron Lund in Stockholm about the effects on Syria of the war in Ukraine. Sam, Aron, thanks for coming on the podcast. Before the break, we were talking about the humanitarian and aid impacts on Syria of the Ukraine war. And now for the second half of our conversation, we're going to talk about first the diplomatic and then the military spin-off effects of this war. In the report you published for us last week, Sam, I understood your diagnosis to be one of sort of opportunity cost, that the big diplomatic hit for Syria is going to be that whatever goodwill and de facto cooperation the U.S. and the U.S. and Russia were willing to do on cross-border aid and other things, while not everyone appreciates its significance, has been a major boon for Syrians, and that sort of quiet or sort of in the corner cooperation is likely to disappear now that it's a zero-sum global contest between the two parties. Can you talk a little bit about what you expect to be lost, or conversely, what new problems you expect to be created for Syria now that we're unlikely to see the U.S. and Russia working together at the Security Council to address some of the more pointed and emergency needs in Syria?
Yeah, I think opportunity cost is right. I think that is also mostly my take. But I mean, this is also this is a case where the humanitarian and the diplomatic are very closely linked, right? Because I mean, this is a U.S.-Russian conversation that had been happening last year, and that had led to Security Council Resolution 2585. Which effectively renewed cross-border aid to the Northwest for a year, and it came as sort of a package deal, right? Including a collective endorsement of early recovery or resilience assistance in Syria, and then cross-line aid from areas of Syrian government control to the Northwest, and then other kind of areas beyond Damascus's reach. So now it is, I think that with the halt to those talks, then I think that the potential for kind of whatever additional compromises might have been achieved and might have benefited Syrians has been squandered, thanks to, Russia's actions in Ukraine.
And, diplomatically, we think in history about times during the Cold War where the U.S. and the Soviet Union were able to collaborate on issues outside their sphere of influence. Is your sense that won't be the case on Syria because Syria will be understood as a core Russian interest and therefore one on which the U.S. won't be willing to make deals with it, even if those deals benefit Syrian civilians?
No, I mean, I've been what I have heard in the course of talking to people, diplomats, et cetera, is that, these meetings, it's not as if it was kind of a continuous, ongoing process that suddenly stopped the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, but it was a series of meetings, and then now there will not be another, right? That it's done. I think that the U.S. it seems like they are deliberately limiting their interactions with the Russians, and I think they're not alone in that either. This is something that I've additionally heard from Europeans, that they had been engaging. I mean, not on necessarily on some of the same issues or some of the same outcomes, but they had been talking with the Russians on Syria, and then but then because of Ukraine, they have received the direction to sharply limit their dealings with Russian counterparts.
And then in July, cross-border aid is going to come up for reauthorization again at the UN Security Council. Is that right? July?
Yeah, and it can only go through with Russia's assent, right? I mean, either kind of Russia's affirmative vote for it, or Russia's kind of passive acquiescence.
So in the lack of talks, how does that play out? It just comes up, and instead of knowing in advance that some deal has been reached, we'll have a suspenseful surprise vote at the Security Council where we'll wait to see what Russia will do at the last minute.
I mean, presumably there will be some kind of preliminary, first kind of posturing, in the Security Council itself, kind of signaling in that way. In addition to some kind of conversations, engagements, if not by Americans, then by other diplomats with Russian counterparts. So I think there might be some kind of a sense going in, but unless there is some change, it's hard to see like kind of a compromise similar to what happened last year being produced, right? And then without some sort of consensual agreement struck, then it is it's a big question mark what the Russians will do and whether they will permit this to be renewed. It is super important because the war in Ukraine's impacts on Syrian food security are kind of differentiated by region of the country. Because of local conditions, because of the economic organization of these areas, how they're oriented. And then northwest Syria, which is the area that is served by the cross-border resolution. So it seems like it is not vulnerable to some of the factors at work in neighboring government-held areas because of the ways that it has been disconnected from them and then reconnected instead, institutionally, economically, to Turkey. But it does seem super vulnerable to the Ukraine war's effects because Turkey itself it seems like it will be substantially affected. Turkey is heavily reliant on wheat from Ukraine and Russia. Turkey's own economy has been fragile over the past year. And then wheat flour, fuel, they arrive to these areas over the border from Turkey. And then so they're at real risk.
Aron, can we talk about what other diplomatic spin-off effects there might be, and maybe you can segue as you speak into talking a little bit about military deconfliction, which is where I want us to end up.
Yeah, sure. But just adding to what Sam said there, I think there's a slight bright spot here, or a silver lining here. I think that Russia really does not have an interest in sort of collapsing the northwest of Syria, because the arrangements around Idlib, as disputed and problematic as they are from Russia's point of view, they're still what underpins the Russian relationship with Turkey in that region and in Syria as a whole. And Turkey and Russia have, they've maneuvered very carefully through the Ukraine crisis. Turkey has, especially. Turkey's now the mediator between Russia and Ukraine, and they're trying to steer a middle course, even as they're, while being a member of NATO. And it's clear that the Turkish government wants to preserve its relationship to Russia. They're explicit about that. Erdogan has said that he doesn't want to sacrifice relations with either Ukraine or Russia, even though he condemns the invasion. And I think it's clear that Russia, no matter how poorly the war goes in Ukraine, or even if it ends up turning in their favor eventually, whatever happens, they don't want to crash the relationship with Turkey on account of Ukraine. And Syria is a pretty big piece of that puzzle. And so, given how important stability in Idlib and the humanitarian, situation in Idlib is to Turkey and to Syria's stability generally, I think Russia does have an interest in making something work. And I think it was also slightly encouraging to see Russia taking its kind of a normal hardline pre-negotiation position in a statement recently on the upcoming cross-border vote. It didn't really stray from how Russia's rhetoric has sounded at this point in time during the earlier rounds of this resolution being negotiated. So I'm not entirely pessimistic, but I agree with Sam that it's very, very dangerous. It's a big issue, and it could end very, very badly.
Well, so let's talk about deconfliction.
Yes.
Is that different? Is that taking place in different channels than regular diplomacy? So can we expect healthy deconfliction, which I think is crucial to preventing things from spiraling or accidental conflict from happening? And that involves Turkey, Russia, the U.S., and presumably other parties as well that are active in that space.
Yeah, I mean, like the purely technical deconfliction, you fly here, I fly there, that seems to be explicitly excluded from normal diplomacy, or explicitly separate from normal diplomacy, at least in the U.S.-Russian case, so relating to northeastern Syria. There's a military-to-military deconfliction channel there, and I haven't seen any evidence that it's been severed. I don't think either nation would want to sever it, because at this point, it's more important than ever that they don't have any sort of unnecessary or unintended clashes in Syria, or something that could spiral out of control there. As for Turkey, I don't know how it works, but given that Turkey has not severed contact with Russia and doesn't intend to, I don't see deconfliction per se being in danger there. But again, if Turkish-Russian relations were to be destabilized by the Ukraine war, say if the negotiations fail, or if the war drags on and Russia starts putting pressure on Turkey to allow naval ships to pass through the Bosporus again, that kind of thing, then I think there might be a temptation to use Syria for leverage against Turkey, or even the other way around, that Turkey tries to put pressure on Russia using Syria. That could also happen. So deconfliction as a mechanism, I don't think it's necessarily in danger, but the principle of deconfliction could be in danger, or the willingness to adhere to deconfliction.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to end on that question, which you've sort of raised implicitly twice now in our conversation, and that's how much should we worry that the conflict in Syria is about to witness an uptick as foreign interventionary powers might view it as a place to increase the stress on Russia?
I think we should be worried about it. I don't think it's necessarily likely, because I think there are strong incentives for all sides to not do that. Russia really doesn't need another conflict to manage right now, for example. Turkey wants to maintain its relationship with Russia. It doesn't need another crisis with Russia. The United States presumably also doesn't feel any great need for this at this moment. And so I don't think it's necessarily likely, but it depends on what happens. And I also think it's important to remember that Syrians, even though they're shackled by external powers and patrons on all sides of the war, they're not mere puppets. They do have agency, and you do have also groups in Syria that do not really respond to command, or at least do not respond to them very well. So there could be local things that spiral out of control. You could have Assad doing something opportunistic, thinking that Russia will have to go along, or you could have Turkish-backed groups doing the same thing. There's a lot of things that could happen, and especially if we start seeing the humanitarian and economic situation deteriorate dramatically because of Ukraine, and perhaps also because of the cross-border resolution collapsing, then you could have the sense of responsibility and sort of caution that has existed to a degree on all sides, just out of fear of what could happen if you escalate it with no plan for what's next. That caution could disappear as people become desperate, and there builds up an internal pressure to do something.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think region-wide, and this will impact Syria, that almost every player that has some kind of regional reach is assessing often delusionally what kind of opportunities this global crisis gives them. I've seen this elsewhere, and I'm going to stick to my promise to not talk about places other than Syria, so I won't say what and where. But to the east and south and west of Syria is a hint, and so that makes me worry that some of these historically foolish and miscalculating regional and local powers might well think, hey, we could cash in this way or that way, and oh yes, maybe some more people will die or starve, but so what? And that's a fear that could play out over the course of a year to come, but it's something that does concern me. Sam, we're almost out of time. Do you want to pop in for a closing minute or less?
Well, I mean, I just wanted to add, and I think this is something that I talk about a little in this report, is that I do worry what might happen if you have a Russia in Syria that is less vested in Syria's stability. Right. I mean, obviously, Russia's attention is currently elsewhere. It is occupied in Ukraine. And so, I think you're probably unlikely to see kind of major kind of Russian policy entrepreneurship in Syria. But at the same time, over this past year, by virtue of this kind of seemingly, this U.S.-Russian dialogue that was ongoing, this exploration of some of these possibilities for humanitarian compromise, and then a seeming willingness on the American side to do things like kind of better defining the parameters of U.S. sanctions. You had a U.S. and a Russia that were jointly interested in kind of relative stability and quiet in Syria. How that played out was that, at least I've heard kind of officials say that they believe that Russia was a check on the Syrian military's tactics as Damascus was kind of reasserting its control more fully in Daraa, in Syria's southwest last year. And additionally, you had Turkey agitate for what looked like, or threaten explicitly, actually, a new military intervention in Syria against the U.S.'s Kurdish-led Syrian partners as late as October and November of last year, right? And at the time, I was told that both the Russians and the Americans told the Turks, no, this is unwelcome, right? So what happens if, hypothetically, the Turks kind of start agitating for something similar, and then, they encounter American resistance, but then maybe, Russian receptivity, right? If Russia has less to gain from this sort of effective compact.
This is one of those wild cards because we're looking at Russia as a malign actor in Ukraine, and paradoxically or surprisingly, you're saying in Syria they may have in recent times been a force for restraint, and with that motive,
in extremely relative terms.
Yeah, with a ton of caveats.
So this is a restraint on whatever. This is kind of moderating something that is still bad, and then. But I think
I guess the idea is that
much worse.
That abuse of the population and war crimes by victorious Syrian government soldiers has been bad, but it could apparently be worse. So we're gonna have to leave it there. Thanks to both of you. I'm Thanassis Cambanis, and I've been talking to Sam Heller in Beirut and Aron Lund in Stockholm. This is Order from Ashes, Century International's podcast about international affairs, and we've been talking about the Ukraine war's impact on Syria. Sam, Aron, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I'd like to remind our listeners that later this month, the week of April 25th, we're launching a new season of the Order from Ashes podcast. This will be the Transnational Trends in Citizenship season. hosted by Naira Antoon, the director of our Transnational Trends in Citizenship Project. She's brought together experts from the Middle East, North Africa region and their counterparts in Europe and North America who work on similar issues: protests, police accountability, militias, and gender and sexuality, and finding out what they can learn by putting their objects of research and policy study into the same frame. So I look forward to having those podcasts start to drop the week of April 25th, and I hope you'll enjoy them as much as we've enjoyed producing them. Thanks for listening. The Order from Ashes podcast has been brought to you by Century International. Our work builds on more than 100 years of commitment to international peace, security, and governance at the Century Foundation. We are independent, critical, and progressive. For more information about Century International's work, please visit tcf.org or follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We depend on audience feedback to reach new listeners. If you like what you hear, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts.